Welcome, everyone. This is the Data Simplified event, Applying Software Development Best Practices. And with us today, we have Lindsay Murphy from Hive. Hi, Lindsay.
Hi.
It's great having you.
Yeah.
Uh, Just a quick overview of what we're going to look at today, some key takeaways. We're going to discover the skills individuals and teams alike require to be successful, and we're going to see how we can better position our data teams for optimal results. Lindsay, how about you tell us a little bit about you?
Yeah, so thanks for having me on the show, Nancy. I've been in the data space for about 12, 13 years now. So I started my career way back in the early 2010s when social media data was really kind of exploding and there was a lot of data out there. So I started as a data analyst at a tech startup and learned SQL and different skills like that on the job. And then from there, kind of just floated my career through different IC roles. I was a data analyst for many years in marketing agencies, got really deep into like marketing strategy and using data to kind of drive business results, and then wanted to get back into the startup space. So kind of missed that like being able to see data throughout the whole company. I felt like the marketing agency side, you would work on a project and then it was kind of a black box whether the customer or the client really did anything with your insights. So got back into the tech space and then started building data infrastructures, building data teams. So now I'm currently at a company called Hive with two eyes. So we are in the secondary trading marketplace. So if you have private stocks that you are looking to sell, maybe you have stock options at a company, you can sell them on Hive, or if you're a registered investor, you can purchase stock options there as well. So yeah, it's been fun and building up the data team there.
Awesome. So yeah, so you have a wealth of experience with data teams, building them from the ground up, and I'm glad that you got back into what you want to do. So that's awesome.
Yeah.
So let's kick off with some key points here. So you talked a little bit about data teams that you've worked with. Tell us what have you noticed in terms of the change of the workflow over the last, 10, 15 years? Observations.
Yeah, for sure. So definitely for myself, like when I think back to when I was first started working in data, like I was querying data from on-premise warehouses, so something like or a database, like something like an Oracle with SQL, and building reports. But we had to log into the server and access data that was stored there on-premise. And so I think probably the biggest thing that changed was really moving towards the cloud. So I remember when BigQuery launched and Redshift launched, and then eventually Snowflake. And so it was a lot easier to just have data to spin up a data warehouse. You could just kind of throw down a credit card and build a data warehouse in an afternoon if you want. And then all of these different tools to move data. So previously, getting data out of a data warehouse or getting data from all these different sources was kind of difficult to get everything centralized and start to build, comprehensive reports and dashboards and all that stuff. Was a lot more slow moving. And now it's relatively easy. You can, like I said, like a data team of one, you can build a whole tech stack in an afternoon if you've got a credit card. And so tools like Fivetran and Stitch and all these other ones, to be able to move data from all these different sources, you don't have to build those connectors yourself. You can kind of just buy them and hook all that up. And then on the BI side of things, it used to be pretty slow. You'd have to have like IT teams, whole teams building BI solutions. And now that is a lot more self-serve, I would say. So instead of people coming to the data team and saying, hey, build me this dashboard. A lot more times we're now kind of enabling others to build their own data and reports by giving them access to clean and high quality data, building data models with things like DBT. So I think, yeah, probably some of the biggest things are the change towards speed and moving faster and kind of leaning on like code-based implementations of your data rather than, building things one off. Yeah, that's kind of some of the big observations that I've kind of lived through in my career.
For sure. Yeah, just the click and play, drag and drop, very easy. So because you brought up like development, um, let's go over like some common principles that you notice that should be applied to data teams. These are things that are going to carry over. Principles will always apply, right? And let's talk a little bit about the impact and scale on enabling them.
Yeah, for sure. So I think when we talk about applying software design and development best practices, the tools that I've had the most experience with is something called DBT, Data Build Tool. So if
Okay.
folks listening haven't had a chance to use DBT, definitely go and check it out. When someone first mentioned DBT to me, I had no idea what it meant or what it was. But in a sense, it's basically a tool that allows someone who might be more traditionally thought of as a data analyst, someone who can write SQL to build data models. And so instead of maybe using stored procedures or things where
Mm.
you're writing code and redoing the same kind of things over and over, you're now building a code base. And so you have a code base similar to how a software development team would have a code base for their product. You're now building code as asset for the analytics team and saving that code. And so there's kind of this concept, there's concepts of version control of your code. There's concept of QAing your code and testing your code.
Right.
There's concepts of environments. So having an environment, a staging environment where you build the output of your SQL code and then you SQL or Python maybe, and then you would push that into a production environment after it's been tested and validated. Your code would be more modular. So you're building modularly and kind of building, having staging layers and intermediate layers and core mart layers so that you're able to take the building blocks of staging and build towards like something that's business usable. So really kind of building up this maintainable asset of your code base and having that pipeline be a lot more production quality ready than what we used to work with, which would have been, somebody wrote this SQL query 6 months ago and we don't really know what it does anymore and we can't test it. And anytime you want to change anything, you've got to go in and manipulate it in that code base. So yeah, I think those are some of the core tenets that DBT really pushes. And then I know with the teams that I've worked with, really thinking about kind of that code, those five principles: code version control, QA, environments, modularity, and maintainability of your code.
Right. Thank you, Lindsay. So because you brought up DBT, and you went into a little bit of what that is and how you can learn about it, what other skills do you feel that data professionals need to learn? Which ones like are critical, like must-haves under their belt?
Yeah, so I'm always one that pushes for the soft skills. Like I think the technical skills are very, very important. Definitely SQL. Like you probably aren't going to get too far as any data professional without learning SQL. I know a lot of people work in Excel, but
Hmm.
more and more as we're moving towards this kind of like code-based world, you do need to learn some code. And so SQL is probably the one that's going to give you the most mileage for the amount of time you put into it. Like I said, I learned SQL back in 2011, I guess. And I'm still using it today, and it's been around for a very long time. So it's unlikely that it's going anywhere anytime soon. DBT, if you know how to write SQL, then learning DBT, I don't want to say is easy, but DBT is essentially just the majority of what you're doing in SQL in DBT is SQL. There's just the concepts that go around that of environments and variables and Jinja and other things like that. But if you start to pick up SQL, then learning DBT is a good next step. Data modeling as a concept, I think, is like a lost art that a lot of people forget about with these cloud data
Hmm.
warehouses and DBT. It's very easy to just build what you're calling data models, but data modeling is truly a concept. It is a way of taking
Okay.
raw data and turning it into something meaningful that represents your business. And so I think Joe Reese, if folks are familiar with Joe Reese, he has said to me, the absence of a data model is still a data model. It's still a choice. It's just a bad one. And so data modeling is something that companies really should be thinking about. And this is not just on the data team necessarily. It's something that, leadership should be interested in, what are the entities, the core entities and relationships in our business that we want to be able to measure. And then the data team has to translate that into data modeling. And then the soft skills that I mentioned earlier, I think communication, being able to actually translate, this is what somebody's asking me for into like, what is the question behind the question? How do I
Mhm.
actually like investigate where do we go with this rather than just being a task taker? I think
Mhm.
those are things that I see a lot of junior data people just kind of jumping as soon as somebody asks them to do something. How fast can I get this out? How fast can I deliver it? And it's really, let's slow down and actually figure out what we're trying to solve, so that you're a good strategic partner, not just sort of a ticket taker.
That's excellent tips. And because you brought up data teams, so let me ask you this. So we have our organization is set up. You have a data team, we have a software development team. Who does what? Like, what's the difference? How do they work together?
Yeah, so this is a big one that I think we can mimic software development in a lot of ways, but our jobs are still going to be extremely different, and we still do have to work with the engineering team typically, or the development team. So typically, the way that a relationship would work between a data team and a software development team is that it's kind of like data producers and consumers. So the engineering team is very often going to be someone who is probably building your production database, unless you have, you might have a whole data engineering team if you've got a really complex system that you need to build out. certain tables and relationships. You might have more data people on that side of it, but typically it's an engineering team that's going to be building your production database.
Right.
And so they're the ones who are building a lot of the data that you're probably going to want to use downstream for reporting and other things like that. And so you need to develop a very close relationship with them to understand how are they architecting the system to collect data and how does the data change as you move through states or as things change for a user or however your product works. You want to be able to help them understand here's what we're trying to do with data so that they help to build things in a way that is going to make your data more usable and more easy for you to get insight and information out of. And on the flip side, you want to communicate, you want to stay close with them in communication because if you're using data downstream and then they change something, they can they'll basically break your schema. And so that's kind of the concept of a data contract is really this like, you want to be able to use the data that they're producing and the consumer, us data people of the data, have to kind of have communication about how we're using it. At a very basic high level, a data contract would be just communication of like, hey, don't change these things. Here's how we use them. But there's more enforcement that a lot of data teams now are working with. Companies even, Gable AI is being built by Chad Sanderson to kind of build like a technical solution to this problem of building a data contract that, enforces that data upstream won't change and break things downstream. So I think that's really an important piece is building that relationship because that has a huge bearing on your data quality and governance of how you're using that data downstream. And then I think more broadly, it's just kind of like learning from their ways and their best practices. Like, how does your software development team work? What can you learn from them? How do they QA their work? How do they test their work? How do they ship things and put their name on things? And what can we do more as data teams to work more like that and learn from them? And then the other piece is that the thing that software development teams don't really have to deal with, that data teams do have to deal with, is the underlying data. So a lot of times the underlying data, the quality of it may change in ways that we don't expect. And so that is something that software development teams don't quite have as much of a parallel there. It's like you build a product, things might break unexpectedly, but it's not necessarily the same way of understanding like the whole underlying data that you're working with. It's one thing to build a pipeline, it's another thing to actually make sure that all the data underneath is good quality and highly governed.
Excellent. I love that. So that they both have to work together to make sure that what one does doesn't hamper the other. So,
Yeah.
great. And so because we're talking about data, you can't talk about data without talking about AI, right? So how is the AI hype affecting data teams, would you say? And what do they need to keep in mind as things progress, as the technology evolves?
Yeah, this is a topic that you could talk about all day, I think, but it's definitely I think AI and the hype cycle of AI is really taking a lot of attention away from data teams, which is interesting. In a way, it's taking attention away, but it's also putting attention on us in a lot of ways. I think it takes budget away from data teams because now companies are thinking of like, okay, well, maybe I can take AI or maybe I can take budget from my data team and just get AI to do this data stuff for me. Like maybe I don't need somebody to build me data models, or I can just talk to Chat GPT and it will write me queries and analyze my data for me. And I'm sure anyone listening who has tried that knows that that is like diminishing returns and
Yeah.
not the best quality that you get back from it. So I think the trend that I'm seeing is that, data work requires a high level of expertise and accuracy. And that those are the things that generative AI right now are not very good at, right? It is getting better, but it's always going to it needs to be trained on the specificity of your business. And unless you have that very well documented and very clear, how do we measure a customer or how do we measure revenue? Like those types of things are business definitions about your company that AI is not going to know. It's not going to know how you want to measure those things because they're decisions that you need to make. And so if you haven't documented all that stuff and you start asking AI to work on your data, it's not going to be able to answer that. But even beyond that, I have seen even companies that are trying to, give that semantic layer, that semantic meaning to AI, still see challenges with AI kind of not being able to work at the same level of expertise as data teams. So for me, I kind of see it more as a productivity tool right now for data teams to move a little bit more quickly, to kind of take away some of that redundancy or tedious tasks, things that we used to have to do that are not great. I also think it helps as like, a coding support. Like it shouldn't replace everything you're doing, but it can definitely help you move faster and help you through as a thought partner in some places, maybe. But I think that companies are quickly learning that AI initiatives can't function without really high quality data. So that is now we need data teams, we need data engineers and high quality data pipelines more than ever for the AI work that is maybe a little bit more not necessarily replacing data teams, but maybe servicing the business or building AI products.
Yeah, so it's more complementing, not supplementing.
I
Yeah.
think so, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. As a ChatGPT user, I can tell you for sure. I mean, it's very useful and great, but it's not going to answer all my questions. It's not going to
Yeah,
solve
for
it
sure.
all. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, so we're almost at the end of our session here, Lindsay. Tell us what takeaways, learning, what do we need to do next? How do we be better? How do you sum it up for us?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's challenging for data folks because there's so much change, and so I think it's really my biggest recommendation for people is to kind of focus on the fundamentals and the principles. There's a really great book. I've brought Joe up twice now, so shout out to Joe. But Fundamentals of Data Engineering by Joe Reese and Matt Housley. That is a really great book to kind of give you, like, especially if you're starting out or you're learning, or even somebody like me, like I didn't come from a technical background.
Right.
So I've learned a lot of the skills on the job. And so I kind of always felt like, do I really have a good sense of everything and the fundamentals of everything? And whenever people are getting into the industry, they're always asking me, what tool should I learn? There's all these things. What should I focus on? I think learn the concepts first. Learn what it means to build a data stack and what all the different pieces are, not necessarily focusing on the tools. Because those things are probably, they're probably not going to change too drastically the fundamentals. The tools are always going to change, the pace is going to change. But I think being able to understand kind of fundamentally what it is that data teams are there for. And then I think, again, not focusing so much on the technical side of things, focusing on what is the data team actually meant to do for a business? What is the business trying to achieve? And
The
how does the data
objectives.
team, yeah, how does the data team help you get there? Because at the end of the day, you can be doing all kinds of stuff with data and it may not make any impact to the business. And those are the data teams that unfortunately get laid off, especially in the environment and the economy that we've
That
seen over
we're
the last couple of years, right? So I think those are the things, some of the takeaways that I would share.
okay, awesome. And then we also, Lindsay, you've shared a couple of resources with us. I'm going to put those on the screen so that everyone can look at those. So can you tell us a little bit about the other resources that you listed at the bottom? Some of
Yeah.
the sites.
Yeah, so the Mad Landscape one that I didn't talk about, but just kind of goes back to this idea of like there's so many data tools out there. The Mad Landscape is I think it's machine learning and AI, I think it stands for. Machine learning, AI, and data, I believe. But this was a landscape that was was first put together in 2012, and they've been doing it every year. So they basically put all these logos on one page of all the companies that they can find in this kind of industry. Back in 2012, I think it had like 120 logos on it or something, or 130, and now it's got over 2,000 on it. So it just shows you how much growth there's been. And then with all of the AI stuff, I think it's just going to get more and more crowded. So that is more just, I mean, it's not really like an asset you're going to use, but it's something interesting to look at and keep an eye on of just like what is going on from literally the 1,000 foot view. Um, the Advanced DBT course is actually one that I run. So Advanced DBT is with UpLimit. And so I, again, have been using DBT for a while, building teams that are using DBT. It's a wonderful tool for folks who haven't had a chance to use it before, but it does get relatively complex quickly in the sense of it's really easy to start a project and have a small project, but when you start to scale that project over time, and as you start to have more people writing code, things can get a little bit messy,
Okay.
it can get a little bit crazy. And so in that course, we kind of talk through, there's 4 weeks and we sort of go through scaling. What are the scaling challenges you'll hit? How can you think about automating more of your work? How can you think about data quality? And then the last one is really just project optimization and cost containment for your data stack. And then the Women Lead Data podcast is a podcast that I run. I haven't been doing it as much recently because I did just start a new job, but I'm trying to get back more regularly. But it focuses on women in the data industry. And so focusing on people who are in leadership roles or pursuing leadership roles and sort of what they're doing in their careers and different stories from those folks. And then the Human Machine Collaboration Institute is a company that was started by Sadie St. Lawrence. So if you're really interested in learning more about AI and where things are going in the future, this is a really great company to follow. She has so many great resources on thinking about how you can incorporate AI into your career path and not get left behind. So I've really been enjoying content from Sadie.
Awesome. Thank you. And then at the top, of course, we have Lindsay's LinkedIn. So,
Uh-huh.
please connect with her. And if you have any questions or follow-ups, send in the comments or send her a direct message. I'm sure she'll be glad to chat with you. Well,
Yeah,
that's
thanks so
the
much.
thank you, Lindsay, for joining us. We loved having you. And this session will be live in just a few days, so everyone's welcome to watch it over and take notes and of course the takeaways super valuable for the teams. Thank you, Lindsay.